about the presentation. Okay, so thank you for joining and welcome to our second webinar, How Citizens Perceive Mobile Mapping. So this webinar will be recorded, so please mute your microphone and disable your cameras. Thank you. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat during the webinar. There will be a Q&A session at the end, and we will answer all of your questions. So, my name is Alexander Petkov. I'm CEO of Zählertour, and with me today is Christian Walter Franz. He's a psychologist based here in Linz. So, Christian, thank you for joining, and feel free to tell a bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you, Alex, and nice to meet you all. I'm very happy to be here with you this afternoon. I've been introduced by Alexander. I'm as an organizational psychologist based in Linz. I'm a little bit in between different branches inside the organizational psychology space, and I would suggest, or I would think that not all of you might have even had the chance to work with organizational psychology and business psychology in general. All the more excited I am because I think mobile mapping is, as a very peculiar and very focused discipline in technological advancements in the last few years, is very interesting from a psychological point of view, which is why I'm very happy that Alex picked up the discussion with me. So I'm very much looking forward to nice discussions afterwards in the Q&A part, hearing your stories, hearing about your experiences within the field, and yeah, I'm looking forward to our talk.
Perfect. Thank you, Christian. So then let's get into it. So I want to start with kind of a story or experience I had a couple of months ago. So together with a local company that also provides mobile mapping, I've been joining them on a mobile mapping run. And so I experienced firsthand how people reacted to mobile mapping in the public area. So some were taking images with the smartphones, like they were firing back at the car. Some other people hit their faces with their hands or put their hoods over their head. Even at a gas station, while they were fueling up, some obviously drunk people gathered around the car and were raising their voices. So it was quite interesting to be in the car at that moment. And some other people just stared at the car and were pointing fingers. And I was asking myself, so why do people react that way? And on the other hand, how can cities and companies gain acceptance for this kind of mobile mapping services? So, Christian, what's your take on this?
Well, Alex, I think one of the main takeaways from your experiences that you've had is something that I think can be viewed not only on mobile mapping as a very peculiar technological advancement, but on many other different technological advancements as well. So that appliance of technology by itself is always a technical process, but on the other hand, there is the emotional reality of the reaction. And this is what I would like to talk about today. Alex, if you would be so kind to let me share my screen, because I had somewhat of a blast actually when researching a little bit about recorded reactions and emotional outbreaks, so to speak, on how different people acted differently when being filmed or photographed by mobile mapping cars. And the first thing that I want to bring up here is, I hope you can see my screen, by the way. Alex, could you just give me a small head up? Is that all right? Okay, perfect. So what we're seeing here is a classic, we would call it escalation on an emotional scale. Because this here is a Coke bottle, and this by definition, of course, is a problem. And we have to deal with this not in a from a purely technical viewpoint, but we have to admit and understand and also empathize with the inner workings that were going on in this particular citizen's head at the moment when being filmed. I want to provide not an answer, but a possible way of thinking about the things that led this Coke bottle to become airborne. And one of the basics where I want to start is to ask the question about what is the motivational aspect behind the throw of a Coke bottle here. So the basic principle here is this person was motivated to throw a Coke bottle at a Google car by something. And it is not an extrinsic motivation. Maybe you have already heard about that. Nobody told this person to throw the bottle. But something within the situation of being photographed and filmed by this car triggered an intrinsically motivated reaction, which can only be described as being, on the one hand, irrational, but on the other hand, very psychological. And this is the point that I want to discuss right now. So, by the way, if you have questions, I would suggest just sparing them for afterwards for the Q&A part, and I'll be happy and glad to take them up and even share the screen once more if there's something that is very interesting to you in particular, right? So, what is the scene here? And on principle, we have citizens, like this fine gentleman here, and these citizens stand in kind of a very peculiarly designed relationship to officials, meaning that the official is being selected and elected by the citizens, therefore giving an amount of power much higher than the citizens have in their individual realm. On the other hand, therefore, he is obliged to govern and provide infrastructure, services, whatever, to provide the citizens with a regular, foreseeable, stable, secure life. So this is what I would call a purposeful relationship. The purpose being something that is very clear and very true to both sides of the relationship. So the citizens as well as the officials know the kind of, let's call it, characteristics and main purpose, main goal behind this partnership that was bonded at the moment where the official gets elected. On the other hand, we have, well, let's call it a very vast amount of things that officials have to do to be able to provide this kind of services, these kinds of security and stability that citizens and society as a whole need and is rightfully expecting them. But to do that, officials could always do that by their own. They need firms that will help them with that. And mobile mapping as a technology is something that can very effectively help. So officials gain something for in the endeavor of helping citizens. So the firm that is recording citizens on behalf of officials, because that is the order the officials planted here, has a very useful and clear purpose, but only between firm and official. So this is something that brings an imbalance between into the relationship between firm and citizen, because there is virtually no established relationship on the first hand. So the purpose within the data transmission between the firm and the officials that has been gathered from citizens, but without their explicit consent, is a way and is a means for the officials to effectively govern. But the problem here is the second part, the consent between the citizen and the firm who is doing all that on behalf of the officials need to govern more effectively isn't there. So I'm sure some of you have heard the term. What happens is so-called cognitive dissonance, meaning dissonance between the things that I expect from a citizen's perspective. This would mean I have to agree before somebody is taking a picture of me, for example, and the position of the firm, who is definitely in the position of thinking that they are helping the official govern more effectively. Meaning, on the one hand, that I'm totally aware of a certain kind of frustration within employees of these firms. On the other hand, a certain kind of insecurity on the officials' part, because they are maybe getting a bad rep by trying their best to govern more efficiently. And on the third hand, a citizen's disappointment by not having the chance of agreeing here. What we see here basically is a classic way of unspoken relations, unclear relations, a lack of communication, and bad expectations that propel themselves into a circle of negativity. And this is not really constructive here. And far and foremost, it is something that is harmful to all three parties involved, because the citizen risks looking like an idiot, like the one on the first slide here, and also risks potentially avoiding getting the service and governance that he or she needs effectively, because they are actively blocking purposeful data collection for the officials to be able to provide a better service here. So they are losing out, the firms are losing out because the dissonance has to go somewhere, and the officials are losing out because their efforts are not particularly well seen here. On the contrary, they are contradicted by their own efforts. So why is this important, and how does this negative emotional action come to be on the citizen side? Well, we have to look at motivational theory first. And the three basic motivational or emotional needs, let's call them that, because that's what they effectively are. Three basic needs that are fundamental to our ability to be self-determinant and motivate ourselves to show a certain kind of behavior. For example, throwing a bottle versus being okay and accept a certain kind of data collection on behalf of a greater purpose that they understand, for example. So this would be a totally different motivation and therefore a different outcome. What do we have to think about when we are doing this? Well, these basic psychological needs are basically three aspects of our everyday perception of ourselves. Meaning, the first one, we have a need to feel autonomous. And I'm sure, just try to relate to these categories, and you will, I'm certain of that, you will all find these basic needs in your daily life. You need to feel autonomous and in the way that you conduct your daily life, your job, whatever, because you know there's a certain kind of competence that you explicitly have. You want to reach the goals that you set by yourself, not have been set by others, and you want to have a feel of belonging to a group that is valuable and important to you. So these three basic needs are all there is to be psychologically fit to self-determine yourself to a certain behavior. So these three needs will have to be satisfied for a person to be positively and constructive here in this manner. Yeah. So when we are looking at emotional reactions, we see there are possible reactions and possible negative behaviors that can be harvested here. The first one being due to a lack of agreeing. I'm sure some of you have already gathered where I'm at. There is a lack of autonomy that is being felt right away by the citizens in the act of being recorded without their consent. This lack of autonomy leads to dissonance that has to be projected somewhere, because the dissonance is well, it makes us uneasy. It is something that we don't want to, and we have to have an idea of where this frustration of our need for autonomy comes from. The first and direct path of attributing this dissonance is to attribute negative emotions towards the firm. Why is this important? Because in the end, it lessens the reputation of the firm that has provided the service to the officials. So if you remember a few years back, the Google Waymo cars, for example, Waymo as one of the first firms doing an explicitly autonomous driving experiment on the streets of San Francisco, they were heavily criticized, and Google took quite a bad rep because nobody knew about that, and everybody was thinking about what would happen if some accident actually happened at some point down the road in the project. So it was only a lack of communication and preparation of the citizens beforehand that led to wild speculation and negative emotional attribution towards the firm that was doing the project here. In this case, Google as both the ordering part and the providing part. So it was both in one. But, and this is very important from the relationship part here, there's an indirect path of frustration here as well. And this is the lack of trust in officials, because they are the ones that were ordering this firm to record us without our consent. So this is something that frustrates our need for relatedness, and it is something that changes, arguably for the worse in most parts, the understanding of the relationship between the citizens and officials. Therefore, as well, this indirect path can also lead to a somewhat negative framing of the relationship that was already in place between citizens and their elected officials. So what I'm saying is the main problem here, in my point of view, is a lack of communication that leads to dissonance. And dissonance looks exactly like this. It is psychological energy that has to find an outlet, and it usually finds the outlet right there where it sees the trigger that originally was the trigger for it to happen in the first place. So communication, reframing, explanation, purposeful communication, these are the main aspects and the main tools for dissonance not to occur in the first place, and lowering the possibility of dissonance beforehand is one of the most efficient and most effective tools for mitigating these situations and sparing your windshields. So, therefore, I would suggest that I stop my presentation here, because I think we have a nice middle ground here. I hope I have managed to fill you into the frame, and I would like Alex to continue with your expertise and an input from your side, please.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Christian. This was really cool insights, really well detailed. So you mentioned communication. So this is basically the solution, or one of the solutions, to mitigate all the risks and the dissonances that might come up when doing mobile mapping and performing these tasks. So one idea would be to basically transport a message and communicate via the car that basically is the platform for a mobile mapping system. So we came up with the idea to basically provide these magnetic shields that can be attached to a car, and that basically tells pedestrians, hey, don't worry, there is still some identity protection measurements in place, so please don't worry, basically. On the other hand, there are not only ethical, moral, and basically social obligations that need to be considered, but also data protection laws. So here in Europe, we have the GDPR. There are some other protection laws in other countries around the globe. And street level images, most of the time, so nearly every time, contain some kind of personal data. That might be faces, that might be license plates. Thus, you need to handle this personal data, this street level images with special care. And it's much safer and much more convenient to have this data anonymized, this personal data anonymized, because then it's not personal data anymore, and it does not apply to the GDPR. So it's a much safer way. The question is why, or even though there are so many obstacles in the way, why should mobile mapping still be done? So there are a lot of benefits to it. It's helpful for road and urban planning. It allows remote inspection. It makes it easier to manage traffic or even disasters. It allows the creation of new digital and public services. And in general, it just contributes to community participation. Our solution for that is an automated blurring. We provide a service that allows companies or even municipalities and cities to basically blur this personal data automatically on street level images. And we invite you to visit our website or send us an email and request a demo. So we are happy to assist you with that. So with that, we are at the Q&A session. So I'm happy to answer anything from your side, and Christian as well. So please share any questions you have. Okay, if there are no questions, then we're at the end. We thank you for joining. Feel free to follow up on us. Oh, there's one question. In your experience, does it make a difference if the cameras are visible, operated by people? Christian, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I would be glad to give an opinion on that. I have to say, yeah, versus just drone type cars driving around. Yeah, it's a very good point here, Bernhard. From a perspective of dissonance and evoking dissonance in people, it is a very important thing to have a visible person on the other end of the relationship path. So meaning the one that is breaching a contract here because I didn't have the chance to agree should always have a face, because then it is a little bit easier for us to be viewing this situation as a personal conflict in contrast to being overruled by an evil corporate overlord. I'm it's a little bit placative here, but the point is the more face you can get in there, the more personal the conflict level is being viewed at, which is one of the big problems why the Waymo situation was such a grave thing for Google not to communicate properly beforehand. So I'm absolutely sure that showing faces here opens up a little bit of space for personality in a situation where somebody feels personally violated in their rights to being able to agree upon first. Which, by the way, I want to pick up on one thing that you said and you mentioned, Alex, beforehand. The psychological value of Zelantur is actually an enormous one, because you have a very important and very useful and reasonable argument to make, because it's not you as a person that can be identified. It's not your identity that is being recorded, but only an anonymous human without personal attributes to them. There is no need for a consent. I know this is something that in the perception in the situation itself doesn't help without being communicated beforehand, but it gives you a very important point in communications ahead, to be able to let the people know that they are not recorded per se in person. So I think this is something that is very important to me. It may be the strongest point that you can make in communications up ahead, to ease a worried society, as a worried group of citizens beforehand, to let them know that it's not you that are on the film, but it is some abstract thing that can be recognized as human, and that was it. So to be able to discriminate you between you as a human and, for example, another living thing like a dog or a trash can even. So this is something that is a very strong point to make. By the way, I'm looking into the chat right now. I see a few other things. No specific question. Great presentation. I recognize the topic. Notice that many customers confuse the technology with other systems, e.g. cameras checking for parking violations. After explanation, they are fine with what we're doing. Yeah, absolutely. This would be a so-called reframing technique. This is something very useful and very, actually, it is effective. Let's call it that. It is very effective because it gives an easy way out from a dissonant situation. So it is like a mental shortcut for people to let go of their dissonance because, I misunderstood and there is nothing to be afraid of. On the other hand, I have to say, we should think on an ethical level as well. And there we have to think about the repercussions that it have for putting the false tag on something that I think should be only better explained and not be, actually lied about when we're talking about the immense usefulness for citizens. But Ronald, if I understand you correctly, the thing is that cameras checking for parking violations as a mobile mapping technique is just another way of putting it. So I think this is a very useful and effective tool to do. Reframing as part of psychologically sound communication. Very, very cool. So there is a question for you, Alex.
Yeah, that's for me. So Bernard asked, how quick can municipalities onboard our service? So it's rather really quick. It requires just an email, maybe just a short description of what they exactly need. We can then send them an invitation to our cloud platform, and they can immediately start to run a demo. Basically, upload some images. Get the anonymized results back in no time, have a look at them, and then we can discuss the next steps and conduct bigger projects. So there's another question. Are you aware of data privacy penalties that had to be paid by mappers that did not anonymize? We are not, no. I mean, there are some penalties out there in terms of GDPR and processing of personal data, but we haven't found any signs that Mapper got fined for that so far. Even though it needs to be done because it's much more safer, and apart from fines, there is even another point that could lead to basically pay damages or pay fines for damaging a person, like for example, if this might lead to some personal repercussions if you're on the street and you will be seen with someone you should not be seen with, So this can be an issue. So we discussed it in our first webinar. So I invite you to check this recording out. We talked back then with a data protection officer, and he explained it in very well detailed.
There's a further comment from Ronald here, if I might just pick up on that, because I think it's a very interesting situation that you're describing here, Ronald. Thank you for clarifying. I misunderstood your question. And I find it to be a perfect example of what can be done with reasonable and clear communication, so that so-called fake news about some things that are happening in the streets can be cleared up right ahead. And usually people are very understanding, and they get the point. If there's no threat, they're totally fine with that. And they can, and they're even, I would even go so far to say, and then they are open to see value. And this is what we're actually trying to do here, right? So thanks for your comment again, Ronald. Great question, by the way.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, thank you, Christian, for joining. Thank you for providing us this really useful insights. Thank you. Also, thank you to our audience. Great questions today. Feel free to reach out to me or Zilan, to us, and even to Christian if you have any more questions. You see the email addresses on the screen right now. We will do a third webinar as well. We will let you know when this happens. And so long, stay safe and have a nice day. Thank you.